We are less than a week since one of the most requested patches in Marvel Snap history, and so it is time to bring you another weekly installment of our tier list series here on YouTube to highlight to you the best performing decks in Marvel Snap right now following that balance patch. For some people, the patch has been a bit of a non-starter. Shuri Zero still feeling largely untouched and still representing over 20% of the new metagame. It feels like a bit of a bad joke in the eyes of some people, but Thanos dropping off the face of the planet down to being a tier 3 deck in comparison to the dominant force it was really has encouraged some diversity and caused people to get brewing in all things Marvel Snap all round right now, making the metagame feel more enjoyable. It's definitely a bit of a regret that no new archetypes have really emerged, but that was arguably to be expected given there were no buffs in the patch, but we are starting to see some changes and some updates to existing archetypes. Now they have a little bit more room to breathe when they're released from the clutches of Thanos Lockjaw. I want to emphasize this week, it's really important to check out some of the silent performers of the week and also take the time to go check out Den CCG's article and take a look at some of the potential additions and future changes for all of these archetypes he's taken the time to highlight for you in that article. As is the case with most reports and meta reports in a still developing environment, things are moving very, very quickly in Marvel Snap right now, so don't simply take any of these deck lists and form an opinion on them based on 5 games. Most archetypes have their intricacies and are likely still being built differently or arguably figured out entirely going into the brand new balance patch. With all that said, let's take a look at the tier list for this week. As always, if you are looking for some budget options, you don't have the flushest of collections, we've got a few options available for you on the tier list on the website. Go give them a click and check them out. This week we have the smallest tier 4 we've ever seen, mostly due to the fact information is still quite limited. Reassuring for some though to see a negative shell finding its way back onto the tier list in any capacity, a card that has largely been very under-respected and underplayed for quite some time now. Moving up into tier 3, we see a bulk of the resurging decks in the metagame that are slowly climbing their way up, joining the ultimate faller of Thanos Lockjaw and similar strategies. Deathwave, not quite in the same place it was before, still struggling to really hang with the rest of the format all around, mostly seen to be inferior to the alternative Doomwave decks instead. Galactus, not seeing the resurgence and breath of life we thought it might with the banning and changing of Aero, looking to see if that deck can evolve moving forward to circumvent some of the other problems that it is already facing. Thanos Lockjaw, Lockjaw Thor, these Lockjaw decks just not having the best of times since they were suitably knocked down a peg from the top of the format, finding themselves as a tier 3 option at the moment and definitely in need of some refinement if they want to continue to perform like they used to. Serra Surfer, an old fan favourite and many variations of that archetype, making a bit of a resurgence in the absence of Leech and finding itself as a tier 3 deck this week. And the Thanos Zoo Kazucula style strategies, also a tier 3 option as a potential secondary home for Thanos. If we move up into tier number 2, Electro Ramp, a deck that is shining thanks to being one of the best new homes for Aero to continue to see play. Patriot, making a resurgence in many forms with many different variations of decks, playing well into an established metagame is quite surprising for this deck, and I look forward to seeing whether or not it can hold its berth overall. Dracula Discard, highest ranking this deck has had in a very long time, another deck that really benefits from the absence of Leech in a metagame, giving you the ability to breathe and play your cards without fear of being horribly blown out. Zabu Darkhawk, finding itself as a tier 2 strategy this week again. Once again, super proactive deck that was really good before the patch. Darkhawk lost a bit of its power from a lack of Thanos on the ladder, but the deck is still very strong all around. Doomwave finds itself at the top of tier 2 this week. Still easily the best pool 3 only deck we can see you playing in the near future if you don't have access to a slightly wider card pool and flexibility. Doomwave proving to be a fantastic way for newer players to the game to really compete in this balance patch. Tier 1 this week covers 2 decks in particular. One is a known quantity and a known story at this point. Shuri Zero remaining the big kingpin of Marvel Snap, regardless of the balance adjustments. But Serra Control finding itself as a contender to this deck and really putting on a bit of a masterclass as to how to perform in a brand new balance patch. This week's silent performers of the week are exceptionally interesting. The bounce archetype has been pushing back for a while now, but not enough of a sample size to really make sure we have concrete data surrounding that deck. Atuma Destroyer, a tempo-orientated version of the old ongoing Destroyer build with a page from Shuri Zero's book and a little bit of disruption, showing exactly what could be done by adapting the tools of previous archetypes. Last but not least, the Magic She-Hulk style strategies are really starting to shine in the absence of some of the changes of the metagame, doing a great job at powerful turn 7s, something that isn't quite as commonplace as it perhaps used to be. So, let's start breaking down these decks for you one by one and showing you a little bit about what this format is all about right now. Let's start off with Shuri Zero. As you kind of expected, this deck still remaining at the kind of peak of Marvel Snap, having retained most of its power through that balanced patch. While Thanos Lockjaw was hit pretty hard by the patch, this one, definitely not the same story. It's slightly less popular than it was before overall, but it still holds a popularity north of the 20% mark, miles ahead of the next most popular deck right now. This was the deck to beat for sure in the first week of the new metagame. The main reason for that is Red Skull as a 13 power card still kind of just feels like its old self, and it's a 26 power card when copied by Taskmaster on turn 6. It wins as many games as the 30 power version previously did. With this change being the sole direct nerf to the deck, many players have actually expressed the feeling that Shuri Zero got stronger, not weaker with the balance patch. Aero is the big question mark in this deck currently, with some players choosing to not run it anymore, while others claim that it is still a great card to be running. Vision is featured in this build this week as a great card to dodge Shang-Chi or Valkyrie in some cases where we don't draw our protective cards. Armor and Cosmo being the ones in question there. Talking about those cards, these two seem to be absolutely key in keeping Shuri Zero as the deck to beat, disabling most of the counterplay the community has come up with so far. Zero Control was a very good deck that really wasn't a part of the last balance patch. It had very few reasons to feel weaker, but considering the metagame didn't change too much apart from Thanos Lockjaw, it didn't really need to adapt very much. Less of Thanos Lockjaw did hurt the deck a little bit, especially as Darkhawk and Killmonger feel weaker as a result, but people are starting to adapt to that shift in the format. While Killmonger is a staple of the deck, Darkhawk seems to have been removed for the most part alongside Rockslide, opening up some spots to play with different cards, noticeably things like Valkyrie as an extra option to punish Shuri Zero. Enchantress also making her way back into the deck right now, and that looks to be enough to keep Zabu in the mix. Several lists of Zero Control are shared during the week, and they all seem to be having very similar results. The biggest strength of this archetype is its flexibility, so feel free to experiment with some of the cards and the potential additions listed in the article. Moving down to tier number 2, let's take a look at Doom Wave. When you don't really know what to play, just play the good stuff. It's a really simple formula, but it seems to be a winning one for Doom Wave and its players, as the leader of the good cards archetype had a really nice week following the patch. Wave in particular seems like a very strong card right now, as it puts in a lot of work against Zero Control and makes Aero still feel like a fantastic card in the face of Shuri Zero. Now changed, Aero is only going to pull one card for you, something Shuri Zero will punish you with by playing a 1 cost after their Taskmaster on turn 6. With Wave on turn 5, the opponent can only play Taskmaster, making Aero feel exactly like her old self. Also, Iceman is proving to be a solid 1 cost card once again, as hitting Shuri, Red Skull or Cosmo can really derail the opponent's play plans. This deck might lose a few ranks on this list when new archetypes emerge, but it feels like a good week to be a pool 3 player overall. Zabu Darkhawk turns up for us next. While the Quinjet nerf dismantled Thanos Lockjaw, the Devil Dinosaur synergy didn't suffer from the nerf anywhere near as much, leaving this deck to be very similar to what it was before the patch. Unfortunately, as Shuri Zero also remained mostly unchanged, Darkhawk and Devil Dinosaur are often still losing the points battle against Red Skull and Taskmaster. This is a really solid deck all around, but not able to compete for the top spot currently. It does seem to be the best home for Darkhawk and Devil Dinosaur, now that Zero Control appears to have dropped both. Dracula discard making a resurgence in the metagame right now. With Leech seemingly gone from ladder play for the time being, discard was finally able to breathe. While Morbius and Dracula can't necessarily compete with a 26 power Red Skull, the synergy has some really solid upsides. First, apart from just buffing Morbius early on, Shang-Chi has very little impact on this deck overall. Mostly doesn't affect anything you're trying to do. Then the discard ability can change the number on its cards like Morbius, Dracula and Sunspot, which makes it much harder for opponents to know exactly what and where they have to beat. In a new metagame when most decks are proactive, those traits can be exceptionally valuable. In the past, discard had already reached a top 5 status, but it never retained it for too long, and I really look forward to seeing how this archetype managed to shake itself out in the near future. Patriot making a resurgence recently off of being one of the best homes for Valkyrie. Valkyrie proving to be Shuri Zero's worst nightmare right now, making Patriot surge back into the Marvel Snap metagame. Last week the deck was listed in the Silent Performers, but the popularity really took off with the patch, and more players are now looking to pick up a brand new deck. This more flexible build was the most popular in the ranks leading up to Infinite, but other ways to build around Patriot tend to dominate below rank 60. Higher in the ranks, it seems the flexibility and the much less recognizable cards and play patterns seem to be a great asset for this deck's success. Electro Ramp also proving to be a solid choice. Apart from Shuri Zero, most of the decks in the current metagame are very annoyed by Sandman, as they rely on playing several cards on the last turn of the game. Also, the new Aero feels great alongside Sandman, as she's basically her old self with an extra power. As a result, Electro Ramp has gone back to a more simple build this week. We're not including the Nimrod or Black Panther packages, instead focusing on being annoying to as many opponents as we possibly can. Shang-Chi also made it into the deck, a card we've never really seen in this shell before, as it represents quite a loss in energy, but the prevalence of Shuri Zero and Sunspot are helping to make the unused energy super valuable and make this a card worth considering. Moving down into tier number 3, Thanos Ongoing finds itself here. Collateral damage this deck, arguably, for the Thanos Lockjaw nerf. Thanos Ongoing Zoo lost a full tier with this patch so far, placing it very close to Kazucula when it comes to performances, hence kind of smashing them together here in this chunk of section. Alongside Thanos Lockjaw itself, this is probably one of the archetypes with the most different lists overall, as everyone is kind of trying to see if the archetype is still worth playing for now. Goose and Valkyrie do seem to be pretty great in the face of Shuri Zero, and the ongoing synergy feels very strong overall in the face of opposing Valkyries, and that gives the deck a lot of upsides. However, it's undeniable the loss of Quinjet hit this deck very, very hard, and there aren't anywhere near as many free wins anymore. As we just mentioned, the Kazoo archetype has had various builds going around since the patch in a very similar vein to this deck. Very much a non-Thanos version of what you see going on. It's made a comeback as well. It's arguably much more affordable. It does seem to be weaker in the higher collection levels, as it doesn't have the same flexibility of Thanos or the punish ability of a card like Valkyrie. But it's definitely worth trying if you find yourself at a lower and earlier collection level. Spherical Surfer is another proactive strategy which came back after the balance changes. Silver Surfer, similarly to Discard, felt finally playable again when Leech wasn't quite as oppressive in the metagame. For the first week, this hybrid list with Zabu and the trio of 4-cost cards was the best performing one by the numbers. Very likely because Shang-Chi helps against decks like Shuri Zero, Goose also providing you with effective equity in that matchup, as playing the card on the Armor or Cosmo lane will often deny the opponent putting up their Red Skull or Taskmaster there. Also, since the Silver Surfer nerf, the deck feels a little short against a number of the other proactive decks when it comes to its point ceiling. In that regard, Wong and Absorbing Man provides you with the extra reach you might need to surprise your opponents. About that extra reach, the Patriot Surfer style decks also making a bit of a comeback this week, something I'm obviously kind of proud of given the work we did on the archetype. Well worth keeping your eye on this one as well. It looks very similar to the Valkyrie Patriot lists ranked in the tier above, and I look forward to seeing which of the two comes out on top in the long run. The true story of the week, Thanos Lockjaw finds itself the biggest loser of the patch, as the deck posted worse results than Thanos decks without Lockjaw this week. Currently, Thanos Lockjaw feels like a shell of its former self, and the deck cruelly lacks the explosivity that made its reputation before the balance changes. It's still a decent deck overall, but if we look at performances, it's hard not to feel bad when comparing it to where it was a week ago, especially as Shuri Zero retained most of its power. This week, the traditional list was still the most popular and had the most data about it, but other builds are starting to emerge and seem to represent the future of the archetype, mainly the Wave, Death, Killmonger variants, and the ongoing versions we've talked about above. You can find those in the article if you want to check them out, and I would expect that one of those two would take over the traditional list in the coming weeks. The nerf to Aero was supposed to be Galactus' big break as a top contender. It didn't happen, unfortunately. First, because Aero still exists in decks like Doomwave, but then because there are so many other cards annoying Galactus, like Cosmo, Polaris, and Debris. At this point, it feels like Galactus just isn't designed to be a top-tier deck, as counter cards are proving to be far too common and easy to include as soon as the deck is discussed wildly among the community. Instead, Galactus should be seen as a great counter deck, punishing decks when they're focusing on themselves too much and forgetting to pack a few disruptive tools. Killmonger being great against Thanos gave Deathwave a nice boost before the patch, so it only feels logical to see it lose a bit of that momentum as Thanos lost a big chunk of its popularity. Wave is definitely still a top tier card in the metagame, but Doomwave simply seems like a better home for it, as that deck doesn't lose to Armor or Cosmo on the Bucky Barnes lane. That tends to happen a lot when Shuri Zero is over 20% of the metagame. Keep your eyes on this one, but for the moment it seems like the inferior version of the deck all around. Overall, I would say the metagame moved in the right direction with the patch. It might not have moved as much as some would have liked, especially regarding the Shuri decks moving about 0 meters from where they were before, but it still moved a bit, especially in regard to how many decks are being played and could be considered relevant in some way in the current metagame. Thanos Lockjaw lost about 20% of its popularity in one go, and that opened the door for various decks to make a comeback, and that is a step in the right direction. Although it isn't likely, there's definitely part of me that's curious whether Shuri Zero can actually remain a dominant deck if it's alone at the top of the metagame. We're already seeing Valkyrie used widely and push several archetypes which aren't relying on high power cards. We're seeing Enchantress back in Serra Control to help disable armor so that your Shang-Chi lands. Iceman, more wildly used, and I'm convinced that card's a sleeper against Shuri Zero because of how many of their cards require a precise timing to be played. None of those things have been enough to push Shuri Zero out of Tier 1, of course. But if we add it all up, now there isn't that much else needing our attention. We might have enough small edges and small counters to create a globally different environment. That or Thanos Lockjaw comes back with a refined build once we figured out how to break it again. I'm starting to be a buzzkill again, I'm awfully sorry, so let's not go down that road. I hope you enjoyed this week's meta report and learned a few things thanks to it as we continue to step into this slightly brighter metagame. As normal, if you want to talk about this tier list, you're more than welcome to reach out to us in the Discord server. Thousands of players talking Marvel Snap there each and every day. You're more than welcome to check out the link in the description box down below. Alternatively, come and find us over on Twitter at Marvel Snap Zone, find Den at DenCCG, or myself at HowlingMines. But until next time, I've been HowlingMines, you have been amazing, and this has been Marvel Snap Zone. Take care of yourself. Have a good one.